This story, people are really angry.
Oh no, this is visceral. You know, this is not penny ante stuff. I mean, this is, you know, Owen Paterson getting £500,000 while he's supposed to be doing the job. It's also, I mean, to a certain extent, it's always been bubbling on. You know, it's like sort of bubbles in a sewer. It's always been there. But when I first went into Parliament, we had two sorts of scandals. You know, there was sex and money,
yeah.
basically.
Sex was the Tories, money was Labour.
Well, we did aspire. I mean, it's hard.
Well, you know what I mean.
But it's hard to believe that I was ever sort of magnetically, throbbingly, sexually attractive. But you'd be amazed that even in those days.
Well, I don't know. This morning's taken an unexpected turn. But,
the point I was making is that the law has actually kept up with sex scandals. And there's things that people used to do when I went into Parliament 22, 23 years ago that are now illegal. But what's more important is that they're just simply not acceptable. They just don't happen. So I think we've almost parked that. I think the law has actually kept up with public morality on that and what the people want. What it hasn't done, the law is absolutely hopeless when it comes to this business about second jobs. And you know, basically £3 million gets you into the laws. The problem is, I think, it's twofold. One is the money to the party, and the other is the money to the individual. The money to the individual is perfectly simple. No second jobs. It's absolutely it's ludicrous to think that somebody, an MP who works 60, 70 hours a week, if they're doing his or her job properly, has got time.
Well, very quickly, because we're streeting, but fascinating interview a moment ago, made the point that some are doctors, lawyers, they need to keep their job ticking along to keep their qualifications. I mean, there have to be exceptions.
That's a tiny, I mean, people like Dan Poulter is a Tory MP in Suffolk, and he's a GP. We had Howard Stoat in my time. That's a tiny, tiny exception. People don't have to keep their hands in as hedge fund managers, for God's sake. You know, you can still be a bloated capitalist. You know, without you don't need to be upgraded on it all the time. Yeah, but the point is that banning second jobs, I think, with maybe one or two exceptions, like Dan Poulter, you know, like the people that we're talking about, that's fair enough. But the other problem is, of course, the money to the party. And in Parliament, we have a thing called short money, whereby, depending on how many MPs you get money to pay for your staff and your researchers. You know, take that away from that and simply say that if you've got a certain number of MPs, you should get paid staff, paid researchers, paid office facilities. And then this idea that, I mean, it's an incredible coincidence. I mean, I'm a sort of warm-hearted person. I always believe the best of people. But every single Tory treasurer in the last 10 years has, oddly enough, managed to slither their way into the House of Lords. I mean, it's an incredible coincidence. And the fact that they all gave £3 million is, again, a remarkable coincidence. That's not acceptable. But you've put your finger, as ever, on it. The public are absolutely fed up to the back teeth with this. And it's not sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink anymore. This is overt, it's in your face, and more importantly, it is actually demeaning and corrosive of democracy. Because how can any politicians claim to actually be an honest person representing their constituents when they're filling their boots? I'm sorry, it's just not on.
If we remove Owen Paterson from the story just for a second, do you think there does need to be reform of how MPs are disciplined?
Yeah, I think the disciplinary system is actually very good. Now, if I can declare an interest here, I was actually investigated myself. I mean, Catherine Stone took over in January 2018, I think it was. And I used to show American students around the House of Commons. Basically, it's a sort of transatlantic thing, just trying to educate them in the finer points of British democracy and have a pop at Mr. Trump. But and then they used to give money to local scout groups of my constituency, the idea, and I never got it. But it turned out that
cash for access.
It was, and it was wrong. Because it never occurred to me, because I got nothing out of it, and you know, and the Second Northolt Scouts got something out of it. But I was properly investigated, very forensically, and I was actually teetering on the edge at one stage because they said, you know, your motives may have been good, but in reality you've broken the rules. Anyway, it was investigated, and I was finally told that they're not going to proceed with it. But the point being that the system is good, the system is perfectly good, but it's what happens then that actually matters after, because at the moment MPs then vote on the decision, and usually the MP then has to make a sort of cringeworthy statement in the House, and you know, they obviously in some cases they get suspended. If you then had a system where you can cross-examine the witnesses, that would be insanity. You'd be going, your cases would be tied up, and I think one Labour MP, who we all know who I'm talking about, was being investigated for about 3 years, and he kept constantly coming back with it. So I think that the sanctions are there, without a doubt. I think the process is there. What isn't there is the regulation that quite simply says, if you are getting £81,000 a year as an MP, that is what you should be getting and no more.
But the most destructive thing, perhaps, of what has happened over the last week is the attempt to change the process to protect themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, well, you know better than I what's going on behind the scenes. A lot of talk that this was all an attempt to prevent the Commissioner looking into Boris Johnson any further. But it just leaves, as far as the public are concerned, a real stench. And that's the danger, not just for the Tories, but actually for anybody in politics, doesn't it?
I'm afraid it does. I mean, I'm extremely old, and I mean, I can actually remember the 60s. I remember, Keeler, Profumo, and I remember the absolute disgust that people felt about what was going on in politics at the time. And it was the way that most politicians felt that they were completely above the law. They're invulnerable. They could do what the hell they wanted.
Yeah, because people forget it was him lying to Parliament that was the problem. It was nothing about...
What... To lie in the nude is terribly rude. To lie in the House is a scandal. No, you're absolutely... It's the Watergate thing. The original crime is bad, but the cover... But your point, again, about trying to change the rules, it's like you get sentenced to something in the magistrates' court, you get done, and then you say, oh, I'll tell you what, let's abolish magistrates' courts and let's have a different sort of justice. You can't do the ex post facto justification. And that, I think, maybe, OK, excuse Boris, and he'd been busy at COP26, he'd had a, desperately difficult dinner at the Garrick Club, he'd been flown down in his private jet, he was with a whole load of, let's cut the guy a little bit of slack, the claret must have been flowing, must have been a pretty good night. And he comes up with this, but what the problem is, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Mark Spencer, the chief whip, should have said, hold up, this isn't going to work. And when you get people swearing at Owen Paterson in the eye lobby, and when you get a lot of the red wall Tories who are cut from a different cloth to the old patrician, Oxford and Eton lot, when they're saying, look, this is not playing well on the patch, suddenly you get this screeching U-turn. And I think we're at a tipping point here. I think, because we haven't even touched on the House of Lords. I mean, I think the fact we've now got 800 people in the House, I think, the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee is the only other legislature which is bigger than ours, which is, not the most distinguished comparison. That's got to change as well, because the idea that you can give somebody a bit of ermine in exchange for 3 million, that stinks.
Boris Johnson has taken a bit of hit in terms of popularity, but we spoke to a pollster about an hour and a half ago on the programme who said, actually, with the public, this might not play too badly, and there's a long way until we have the next general election. One Conservative cabinet minister saying this is just a storm in a Westminster teacup. For Labour, that could be a problem if this doesn't actually have the impact on the public that they're hoping it will.
I totally disagree with that. I think when George Eustace said that, I think, as you said, one of the papers this morning calls it storm in a sleaze cup. Look, remember Campbell's Law. If it's still on the front page after 7 days, you're in dire trouble. And when I started to see the newspaper headlines this morning, obviously from you, most of them, initially, it was all strange stuff about microplastics and that, and then suddenly it goes, jing, 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 sleaze, 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 sleaze. If this continues, then the government is in trouble. But you say there doesn't have to be an election until 2024, and technically you're right. I think Boris Johnson would want to go next year, because the economy is not going to improve massively. We're going to come out of COVID. What he wants to do is to come out on a post-COVID bounce, with the economy looking a little bit less worse than it used to be. This has now limited his options. He's now been boxed in, and he doesn't like that. And so that is where it's going to make a huge difference.
Well, what he does is he'll think of something else to get on the front pages. Here comes the Northern Ireland Protocol, talk about Article 16, Brexit, let's get it done. It's not done.
I find it very depressing that hardly anybody actually understands about the Northern Ireland Protocol. And very, very few people understand that the 302-mile border, if you like, between Donegal and Dundalk is totally porous anyway. And the idea that you can create some sort of a barrier there without any sort of physical infrastructure is absurd. And I think that in many ways the European Union have absolutely bent over backwards. I'm sorry, this may not actually align with some of the politics that you hear nowadays, but I think they've really done their very, very best to create a system that works. But ultimately...
Well, hang on a minute.
Here we go.
But no, they have split our country in half.
No, hang on. Sorry, Ireland is 32 counties. 4 of the counties, 6 of the 9 counties of Northern Ireland, which used to be called Ulster, were split by the British government in the 1920s.
Yeah, well, we won't have a history lesson. But what's to stop us saying to the European Union, OK, put a border up across that very porous border. It could never work, but it's up to you to do it.
The minute you have a physical infrastructure border, you've got cameras on poles, you're going to have somebody to guard the camera on the pole.
Well, the minute you were doing that in the Irish Sea to all goods between England and Northern Ireland.
Different matter. This is Ireland. People speak about Norway and Sweden. Norway and Sweden has got about 10 crossing points, even though that's an EU and a non-EU country. And they close them at 10 o'clock at night. It's just not even remotely comparable. If you start actually having a uniform presence on the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, then you can forget the peace process. Then you are in dire, dire trouble. in my opinion.
Well, it's always good to talk to you. I mean, we always get a massive response when you come on saying, oh, get him on more regularly. So, yeah, we'll get him
I
on.
don't think get him off more regularly.
No, you'd be surprised. Well, you are surprised. Yeah. It's really good to see you, Stephen Pound. Very quick, I mean, how do you think today will end?
I think if there's going to be, and the one thing that Boris Johnson would love would be to have this committee of inquiry in the House, because that is the great thing in politics, kicking the can down the road. Have an inquiry, whatever you do, it'll just waffle on. It's a typical Liberal Democrat nonsense where they're going to say, oh, let's have an inquiry, and then people they'll sit there in some sort of dark room, tucked away in upper committee corridor, and nothing will happen about it. What we've really got to do is to address the fundamental issue, and the key thing here is the 3 by-elections we've got coming up. What will happen in those 3 by-elections? Will there be a sort of a Martin Bell moment in North Shropshire? Who knows? That will be the key thing, because if there's one thing that really, really galvanises the Tory party, it's the shadow of the gallows over them.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.